When you hear the phrase soft as steel, what do you think of? While the word steel might conjure up images such as massive high-rise buildings, where does the soft part come in? And what exactly does this mean in our work and in our lives? Welcome to the Soft as Steel podcast with your host, Dennis Duran, featuring engaging conversations with a wide range of industry leaders around soft skills, how we practice love, inclusion, social justice, and compassionate leadership that's everlasting in the workplace. And now, here's Dennis Duran.
I'm very pleased to welcome to the Soft as Steel podcast the CEO and co-owner of the PD Group of companies, Jeff Granberg. PD Group is comprised of 8 progressive and diverse companies serving clients across Canada from 6 locations in Western Canada with its headquarters in Edmonton, Alberta. Jeff has in total over 30 years experience in the construction industry. He first joined Parc des Rochers in 1976. However, in 1979, he went on to post-secondary education in an unrelated field. Over the next 10 years, he went back and forth between the construction industry, social services, and was even a partner in a travel agency. He returned to the construction industry on a full-time basis in 1989 and rejoined Parc des Rochers in 1997 as a fireproofing division manager and vice president of construction. He worked his way up through the rank and file as a card-carrying union tradesperson. His journey with PD includes filling a range of positions within the firm, including project manager, senior estimator, division manager, operations manager, vice president, president, and currently CEO and co-owner. PD Group of Companies won a Best Managed Companies Award in 2016 and became a Gold Standard winner in 2019. And Jeff was recognized as the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year in 2017 in the Prairies in Real Estate and Construction Division in Canada. Recently, Jeff joined me for a special episode recorded in front of a live audience at the IUPAT Finishing Industries Forum. It was Jeff's contribution to the conversation with 5 other construction industry leaders, including the general president of the IUPAT, that put Jeff at the top of the list of invitees for my podcast. Jeff, welcome to the Soft as Steel podcast.
Oh, thanks, Dennis. That was a pretty good intro, I got to admit.
Well, you wrote most of it, so it better be good. I fixed a couple of your typos and a little bit of your grammatical errors, but other than that, it's interesting. And as I said, as I was writing that, I hadn't focused on it when I read your information on LinkedIn months ago. And that's why I was careful as I put the accent on a total of over 30 years. So right off the bat, in terms of listener interest and my interest, tell me about leaving the construction industry, going on, getting a degree. I imagine it's something to do with social work and also the travel agency. Tell us a little bit about your journey in those parts of your life.
Well, I grew up in northern Saskatchewan, and as I grew up in there, everything in Saskatchewan was flatland. And when at a young age, as I start working, in the construction industry at 15 years old, I lied about my age and worked in the summers at helping construct a new plant. And with that, I continued to work on weekend cleanups and in the summers in the mill. And I quickly realized I did not want to work in a sawmill. I wasn't a farmer, and I didn't want to earn my living cutting down trees. So I ventured off into Alberta. A friend of mine who was a few years older than me said, "Hey, you should come work for us in Calgary." And hence I went to Calgary. I started working with Parc des Rochers at that point in time. No idea what I wanted to do. I was a 17-year-old kid. And I started painting. And I still remember my first week on the job. Back in those days, we didn't have the same standard of safety. So I was 30 feet in the air, and I had to walk a 10-inch I-beam 20 feet long and do a touch-up painting. Well, that took me 20 minutes because I take a step out and I just looked down, couldn't do it. Finally, I sat in my bum and I kind of pushed myself to the other end. And so that was my start in the coating industry. I spent 3 years in the construction end of things, and I was alternating between the painting and the fireproofing side, and went, I'm not sure I want to do this for a living. So I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so I enrolled and I got accepted in criminology, with the end point being eventually getting to be a criminal lawyer. I thought that'd be a pretty good occupation. But to put myself through school, I continued to work construction. So by the time I was done criminology, I had worked me up being a general foreman. From there, I went into a probation officer for a while. I worked at that at my practicum, and I specialized in working with street kids. and went back to construction with Park Rocher. Got called in, and I ended up specialized working with street kids, Inuit and Dene children, and kind of the worst of the worst. I worked with kids that unfortunately were in there for serious offenses. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed that part. When I looked at my first paycheck, we got paid once a month. I realized, holy man, it's like I'm making more in 2 weeks working construction than I am in a month. And I'd subsequently got a call from the founder, Merle DeRoche. They had a major project up in Fort McMurray, and they said, well, would you come run the project for us? I said, well, geez, I'm working in a different field now. And he said, what would it take? And so I told him, well, if I'm going to quit this job, you're going to have to pay me to come home every second weekend. And the weekend I'm up there, I want to work overtime to make some money. So I thought that was a good chance for me to pay off my student loan. And so that's what I did. And I alternated back and forth. I did that for a bit. I got a call back from a place I was working. They were opening up a facility in the northern part of Canada, a place called Yellowknife, and it was specializing working with just Dene and Inuit children in their environment versus the environment in Calgary. Some of the kids we'd worked with is that, they lived off the land, the Dene. So, I thought it was interesting to go up to the north. Unfortunately for me, as I took the job as a supervisor up there, but I didn't have the authority to hire the individuals. So I was part of that hiring process, but they ended up hiring 16 people that worked underneath me that had their degrees in social work or psychology or sociology, but they were all born and raised and educated in the city. Mm-hmm. And for them to understand the differences between, the cultural difference between the Inuit and the Dene was very difficult. Me growing up northern Saskatchewan, I grew up with those cultural differences, and I played sports with them. I went to school with them. But, for me, I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about human behavior. So later in life, when I went back to the construction side of things, I think I just had a broader perspective on human behavior and recognizing today they call it emotional intelligence. To me, I call it street smarts of, learning how to deal with different types of people, different viewpoints, different educational backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds. And that certainly, to me, was probably the biggest influence on my success of hiring the right people, because I'm a real advocate of recognizing what your weaknesses are and hiring to it. And I think a lot of times managers struggle with that. They want to prove to their superiors that they know it all. Well, you don't. You can't. It's impossible. Everybody brings a different skill set. So to me, if you can recognize what your skill set is and then hiring people that have skill sets you don't, that's a hard thing to do for a lot of people, because it means, that person might know more than me on that topic? Well, the answer to that is yes, and that's the whole intent of. Mm-hmm. But that is one of the hardest things I think people have getting their head around is hiring someone smarter than them in different capacities. And I think once you get to that point, that's when I think you start making the changes. I look at my own personal experience and, growth we had in the organization. What I didn't know when I came back to Park Rocher, like a lot of companies that go through the peaks and valleys, and I didn't realize how deep the valley was before I came there. I look back at that is when I realized once I signed is that the company was very close to closing their doors. And then all of a sudden my challenge was, well, how do we rebuild this? And I rebuilt it with people that had worked with me for a lot of years, way back when I first started with Park Rocher. And back in those days, I was playing a lot of ball. So I hired ball players as tradespeople, and weekends as our gig was we went around playing ball tournaments all around southern Alberta and southern Saskatchewan. So that's kind of how I started rebuilding, is bringing my old crew back and then just kind of going from there. So I went back and forth in those different areas. I learned lots. I learned lots as I was working in the travel industry with my father. My father had decided he was going to retire, and he became friends with an individual that had a travel franchise that predominantly did corporate travel. So that was a great experience for me because, I really hadn't had the exposure to reading financial statements. I had to learn that by, trial and error. Also doing presentations. And my job was we were living in Calgary at the time. That's where we had our travel agency, and I had to get all dressed up in a suit and a tie. Back in those days, you weren't allowed to just use the pocket square and no tie. Go downtown corporate Calgary, knock on the doors of oil companies and convince them to use us as their travel agent. Well, it was a good thing I had a jacket on because I was so nervous that I had sweat stains probably halfway down onto my belt. But it taught me how to do a presentation. It taught me how to be clear and concise. It taught me to learn rejection because, in sales, I don't remember exact stats, but it's something like, if you make 10 cold calls, you'll get one appointment. You take 10 appointments, you get one sale. Well, that's a lot of phone calls. That's a lot of knocking on doors. And I remember going through back in the days, remember the Yellow Pages, it went from A to Z and phoned every single business in there twice. And that's pretty humbling as how many times that, the phone gets hung up on you. But it was a hard lesson, hard thing on sales. But again, that served me well. So when I take a look at the experience I had as a kid growing up in Northern Saskatchewan, a small community, and that rural living, working in sawmills, going back to school, the lessons I learned working in the coatings and fireproofing industry, combining that with my experience in working in a corporate travel agency, I call it my quilt of success. I learned something from every part of those. And, I think that's one nice thing is that you might get more aches and pains as you get older, but I think if you reflect back, you start realizing the things you learned. Because at the time, I don't think you realize the lessons you're learning. And I don't think you really put that together till much later. But when you do, it's like, yeah, okay, that makes sense now. And that's why you look at some of the taglines you heard when growing up, it's whatever job you take is, put your best foot forward. I mean, try not work the person to your left and not the person to your right. And if you do that, opportunities present. If you do that, there's going to be lessons learned. And there's always going to be people that are more efficient than you are, but you learn from them. So, yeah, to me, it really has been a quilt of success for me, Dennis.
Well, yeah, this explains a lot about the impression that you've made on me in our limited number of contacts over the last several years. To hear how you talk about your experience. You're a person who is a perfect example without focused on titling a set of skills, soft skills versus hard skills. You've been developing both of those and over the course of your career, and probably the one which is one of the reasons why you're as successful as you are is that you have developed the skills that are necessary for you to be able to build relationships with people over time, starting with the people that work for you as you built your crews in the construction field or as you built your customer list at the travel agency, practicing the skills that are necessary to let people know that you're somebody that they want to do business with, either as an employee or as a customer. And that boils down to something which you're very skilled at, and that is communication. So it's hearing that fuller story was a very good use of time in our interview, because I think you're again a great example of we can be at a destination at a certain point in time, and you now are sitting in the position of CEO and co-owner of a highly successful, large contracting and services business in Canada. Well known by a lot of people in the construction industry, and as well as the petrochemical industry and other places. And that doesn't just happen because your folks win bids and do a good job, or the fact that you put forth as strong ingredient in your messaging. And I can only rely on what I see on the internet and on your website. You talk it's very clear that there are two things which are hugely important to you as a value, and that is the importance of safety and quality, and your website speaks volumes to that. But now, as I understand your story, I see where some of the origins that lead us to those two critical considerations in selecting and continuing to work with particular organizations, and that is the strong safety culture and the strong quality culture you have in your companies. Am I reading that correctly?
Oh, absolutely. Those two things are front and center of our success. And I would add on there too is that I take a look at our loyalty component to our people and our expectation of them being loyal back to us. And I take a look at some of the people who work for us, and for me, I pride myself that, I mean, a couple of them are now retiring, but I've had 10 people follow me through 3 different companies. And 4 of those guys are back in the days when we were playing ball together. What I enjoyed about that, what I learned from them, is that we could cut to the chase. We didn't have to be, maybe it's politically correct behind closed doors. When others are around, we certainly were, because, I mean, you don't want to set a stage where you can talk to people somewhat disrespectful. And again, don't take that out of context, but when you're like brothers or good friends, sometimes you skip some of those, but you don't want to use that as an example of how you deal with people. But it's that loyalty component. I've had people leave and come back. I mean, I think in life that sometimes the grass seems greener on the other side. And we've kept that open door policy. Leave on good terms. You never know when you need your next job. And we've had lots of people that have left and came back, some of them 3 times. And they've become some of our best employees. And I think that the fact they know they can leave and explore their options. We had a situation with a young guy 2 years ago. He was approached by a competitor about saying, "Hey, how would you like to be, a general manager?" And he was, at that time, he was 29 years old. And he said, "Geez, I don't know what to do." And I said, "My advice to you is go." I said, "Because if you don't, you're always going to question or wonder, did I miss an opportunity?" And I said, "But the door's always open." And my wife through the years got to know him, and he said, I don't want to mention the guy's name, but he said, my wife said to him, "Well, you'll be back in 9 months." And he laughed. Well, he came back in 10 months. And so her joke was, "Okay, so I missed by a month." But he's now one of my guys in our organization, and is leaps and bounds ahead of some others. He went and got that bit of experience, and he came back, and he recognized you can do so much more with a team of people. And I think one of the things that's really become a lot of fun with me in the last 3 years is that I've kind of got re-engaged with working with our estimating and project management side, and going back down to some of the basics, because sometimes when you're going a different direction, being led by a different manager, it might not have been the same direction that I thought we should go. But there's that fine line where you don't want to micromanage or step on someone's toes. So you have to allow that individual to try and carve their own path within. But unfortunately, he was going in a direction that wasn't the direction we wanted. We'd lost some of our contacts. I think we got a little complacent and maybe even a little bit arrogant. So we regrouped, we made some changes, and I gathered all these guys in the room, and I said, "Look, you guys are between the age of 30 and 38 years old.
Wow.
Some of you guys have been here for 6 years, some of you have been here for 12 years. You're the knowledge, you're the future. I need you guys to lead me now. What do you need to be successful?" And so I'm taking the handcuffs off, and that's going to be the first 6 months. So you guys feel comfortable with that. And then we're going to work on with autonomy comes accountability. And then the next step, we're going to work on business 101. And, we've seen that. It took a while for a change. But the interesting thing is the last 9 months, man, I think we've built a team that is probably the best team our organization's ever had. And the cool thing, our average age in our office in Edmonton, we have approximately 70 people. Our average age is around 38 years old.
Wow.
Which is very young.
Yeah.
But young with lots of experience. And I take a look at the mix of people we have. So I'm having fun again. I'm having fun with looking at how we do things differently, but yet how we do things the same. And I think a lot of times working with that generation, they're looking for new ways of doing things. That's not a bad thing. Our generation, we're told if it's not broke, then don't fix it. This generation, if it's not broke, break it, let's rebuild it and come up with a new way of doing things. And I think our generation sometimes struggles with that. Well, we've always done it this way. Well, that's one of my pet peeves. If we're still doing it the same way today as we were 10 years ago, then we're missing the boat. And I think that's one of the keys for organizations that adjust. I mean, we've been around since 1956. We've had to make a lot of adjustments to survive those years. We don't do things the same way today as we did even 5 years ago.
This is educational. People will listen to this and learn from what you're saying. So you know that in my vantage point, I'm the soft skills guy, and so I talk about soft skills as not being skills. They're really the qualities of people that help them to build and maintain relationships. You've heard me a number of times, and thank you for your patience in sitting through my presentations numerous occasions. I appreciate that, because I always notice when people get up and walk out. You're tall enough that I would have noticed you leaving the room. But I think as I'm listening to you and listening to how you're interacting with what is a young, in terms of average age, a young middle management group,
100%.
Which I think is nothing but good news for the future of Parc des Rochers and its companies. And as you've been interacting, the way you describe getting together with them and saying, some of the things you say to them, what you're doing is giving them, in your words, the vision for the future. This is where we are now. This is where we need to go, and you guys are the ones that have to figure out each and every step that's going to get us there. Is that a fair way of saying it?
Yeah, that's a very fair way of saying things. In fact, one of the things I had to teach them when I started getting back into bid reviews would have been 2 years ago, and I had to kind of brush off my skills, but that was something I always enjoyed, was the estimating side, because it's not just about the estimating, it's about the strategy. And we were starting to do boilerplate estimating. And so where's your thought process? What's your strategy? So honestly, it took well over a year from saying, guys, look, if you're coming in here and want me to go through all your spreadsheets and do the estimate, what do I need you for? What I want to do is come in, and the first thing you got to tell me is that, do we want the job or not want the job? If we don't want the job, tell me why. If we want the job, tell me why, and tell me what's your strategy and what's our price point going to be. But what's our sell point going to be? How are we going to communicate to the client? Because, a lot of the times we got the job, we weren't the lowest bid. I don't want to be the lowest bid in every job. But I do want to build a rapport with my client, knowing, okay, Parc des Rochers might be a little more expensive, but we know they're going to warranty, stand behind their product. They're going to work safe, and we can count on them. And I said, that's important. And so this is where we're really starting to move. And again, I have to repeat this every once in a while. Well, do you want to go through my spreadsheet? No, I don't actually. I want to go through what is our strategy. Because, I tell people, I don't know if you've ever played the game Catan, but it's a game from Germany that a lot of university kids play. And it's a very strategic game. So I said, business is like Catan, Monopoly, and Risk. And you've got to know the rules, and you got to know how to play within that and outsync your component. There's nothing more enjoying than being your friends and your family in a game, as long as you're playing within the rules. So your competitors don't need to be your enemies. In fact, you want to get along with your competitors, because everybody needs good competitors. We need to help make our competitors better, because then the price point is going to be less. Good competition, that price point is 5 to 7% spread. Bad competitors, it's 30, 40%. They're going to get a job from you. They might not survive in 2 years.
Yeah.
But again, so it's coming down as, what is our strategy? What is our strategy to walk away from a bid? Because there's some clients it's our strategy to say, here's our price, but because it's customer X, we're going to add 20%. So we stay in there and maybe we feed the industry. This is where the prices should be.
Yeah.
So it's that strategy. It's when you get out of a certain segment of your market. Because, people have such huge egos that sometimes they get their ego involved about winning the job. I'm going to make sure company X doesn't get that job. Well, that shouldn't be how you do it. You say, what's our strategy? Do we want this job? What's our price point? Then you can say adjustment. You know what? I think that company has got their boots filled. We can add an extra 2%. Or
Mm-hmm.
if we want this job because it's the start of the year, let's drop by 2-3%.
Yeah.
But when you start looking at dropping 10, 15, 20%, you got to ask yourself, is my ego getting involved because I don't want company X to get that job?
Right. Right. You know, when I hear you use repeatedly the word strategy, what I hear is I articulate it a little bit by saying what you're saying to them is that you need to know your customer, you need to know your competition, you need to know the marketplace.
100%.
You know, so that's and so there's no substitute for knowing things, knowing the things that you can know, and then when you talk about potentially the creeping in of a higher level of self-esteem or ego, that's simply that gets into the part of the brain, because you already mentioned the word emotional intelligence. That gets into that part of the brain where we think about, you know, the fact that as people receive information, as they gather information, as they have conversations, as they interact with others, all that is working through their brain, and it doesn't all jump to the analytical, objective part of the brain processing. It goes to the part of the brain that deals with emotions, with feelings. Mm-hmm. And if I'm feeling like I'm the baddest ass on the planet, that's gonna filter how I deal with what the reality may be, as opposed to what I think it is, or what it looks like to me through my lens. Right. And so the way you talk to your managers is, you know, basically the same thing. Your choice of words is ideal, and what you're focusing on. Again, I'm just listening from the outside. What you're focusing on in a pretty direct way is around. We have a process to build an estimate, and if you don't know a lot about estimating, you can go and take the LMCI 2-day estimating course and get the basics from Dennis. You know, and so that's where you get the basics. We need to have a process. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be understood by everybody, and everybody needs to use it so that we are looking at it and saying, on a case-by-case basis, we have a way of doing this that is producing results that we can rely on for the purpose of making final decisions and deciding, do we submit the bid or do we not? Do we add to the price or do we subtract? All those kinds of things. And that's all the hard skills stuff that goes into that foundational function within a contracting company. And I view estimating as being incredibly important to the success of any contractor, and I'm sure you agree with that. But then you go further, because when you talk about communication, when you talk about strategy, all those kinds of things, now you're challenging them, and maybe not in a frontal assault way, but you're challenging them that they need to understand the people that we do business with, the people that we want to serve, the people that we compete with, and we need to understand ourselves as we go about interacting internally to come up with our strategy, to come up with the assumptions we're going to put in a proposal, et cetera, et cetera. And that means that we need to get, to work on the soft skill side to make sure that we're not resisting Jeff just because he's been around a lot longer and I want to prove to the boss that I can do it better. Because that's not the way. That's not the way to win the day for the end result that we need to achieve, and that is to be a successful business, build a backlog, build profitable work, and succeed, which is what your company is doing.
No, you summed that up well. And I mean, I also look at one of the taglines I use is going in the war room, and I use that more on project preparation as to when we're going to go in and execute. I'll give you an example. Is that we were doing bridges the last few years, and one of the things I saw is that we didn't have the same guys estimating the bridge and trying to execute the work, our part of it. So we really didn't find our pattern. We didn't have a way of doing it. It was changing all the time. And I said, guys, that's not the way we're going to do. We got to build the teams. We have the same people estimating, the same people project managing, and is it the same with the crew? So we put that in place. We decided that the thing is we were at the mercy of general contractors on these infrastructure projects, and some of them were, so concerned about dealing with the ministry that if we brought something forward that should have been a change order, they didn't want to take it forward because they didn't want to upset their client. Mm-hmm. So we decided, and also that their cash flow is depending on getting paid. So we're sitting behind the scenes. So we said, no, we're going to become our own general. and we're going to hire the mechanical and electrical and roadways and all those kind of things. So we took on a big project up in northern BC. And it was a $30 million project. And I said, before we start this project, I said, before we have a kickoff meeting, I want you guys simulate a kickoff meeting. I'm going to be the client. You're going to come in and you're going to tell me how we're doing this bridge. And because we're doing the coatings, we're doing the blasting, we're doing the scaffolding, we're doing the shrink wrap and the road control, and the mechanical, like I want us to come in as one. So you come in. It took us 7 meetings before we got to the point that when we had a kickoff meeting, we now all of a sudden had all our subs in line to what we're doing. We had refined the schedule, refined the laydown, refined the crew size, refined our dates. And this was a 14-month project, and we should be done end of May, meaning we'll be done 4 months early. Wow. Why? Because we went in the war room and we looked at all possible scenarios, but we had all players, including our subcontractors in there. And, well, how do we make this better? And the cool thing about that, our mechanical guy said, well, if you guys do it this way, what if I start at this end of the bridge rather than everybody going to work and trying to find their own place? So I've used that as an example. So I call it going in the war room and making sure everybody has an equal voice, because I don't want someone going there and dictating how we're going to do it. I say, okay, how do you want to do it? And I say, I don't run as a democracy. You have to have someone in that room that say, okay, I've heard everything. Maybe we need to come back and do this again. But at the end, let's try and get a collective decision. If not, then someone else say, okay, this is the way we're going to do it. So it's that communication piece again. We'll always come back down to that. Yeah. So sometimes, as you know, you need the soft skills to sell the hard skills.
Yes. Yeah, well said. I like that. Can I use that in future talks?
Absolutely.
Do I have to attribute it to you, or can I just make it like it was my own idea?
Oh, I'd make it your own, yeah.
No, that's it. I mean, that's kind of like that's straightforward. You're right. You need the soft skills to sell the soft skills to sell the hard skills. Because if you just go in like a bull in a china closet because you think that's the best way to get this project moving, and you don't have any sense of who the people are you're dealing with from a personality standpoint, from whatever exposure you've had for them, you can knock yourself out of the game on day one.
Oh, 100%. And, I think the ultimate compliment, and again, this is parking your ego, is, when I first came in 3 years ago and trying to make some changes to how we saw the world, or through the lens that the other guy had, I'd tell them these things and they thought they were just taglines, and it was so frustrating initially. And I was getting frustrated. How are we making these mistakes? And we weren't doing this 10 years ago. And it was my son, Ryan, that finally said, and he never calls me dad. It's always Jeff, is from a work standpoint. And finally he says, Dad, you keep going off how pissed off you are, but we're doing this and making these mistakes. He said, but who mentored us? Like, who's going to mentor us to do it right? And I went, damn it, you're right. Yeah. So I had to change my thinking again and say, okay, me getting frustrated where we are is not changing. It's doing that root cause analysis and say, okay, so what's the solution? Well, the solution is to mentor and help. So, and once I embraced that, I was getting more satisfaction again, rather than just being pissed off that we're making these mistakes that we had figured out 10 years ago. And when it was, we had a conference here 4 weeks ago in Canmore where I brought in 20 of our guys, and they all had to do business. Every division had to do a business plan, and then Ryan reviewed it with our accountants, and it was quite in depth. But by the time they came to this conference, I said, I want a 15-minute elevator pitch of what you're doing. Because if you can't stand there and no more than 5 slides tell me what your business plan is for the year, then you don't know it. And what I've seen in these business plans is all these things that I said 18 months ago I felt was going on deaf ears. All of a sudden it was their ideas. And I'm going, so there's 2 parts of me. One part of me going, well, what do you think I've been telling you? But then the compliment side is, okay, they get it. Now it's theirs. Now they own it. That's ultimately what you want. You want them to own it, become their idea, because now if it doesn't work, well, it was your idea. It's no longer mine. As again, I think sometimes managers get caught up, but that was my idea. Well, don't do that, because you've just taken away their ownership. So again, so that's that, putting the ego in check.
So I'm extending our time a little bit, but I hope you don't mind. You know from our time together on the stage a few weeks ago that I touched on four themes that are part of everything that I do in terms of my conversations, my podcasting, my speeches, and that is love, inclusion, social justice, and then leadership. And we touched on all four of those during that, what ended up being a 90-minute conversation. Again, your words as you relay your experience, your story, how you progress, and where you are now. Your story is the story of a person who, from day one, not only learned something about the tools and the trade, but also was learning about what being a leader is all about. And so you've been, in a lot of ways, without the benefit of the term, perhaps the founder of Parc des Rochers mentored you, but you then had someone to give you a little bit of a wake-up call on the notion of what mentoring is, which is not an anecdotal involvement with someone, but it's a relationship that you build with individuals to help them learn the things that they might not otherwise learn, or learn them in the way that might be more beneficial to them individually and also to their ability to contribute to the success of a company. So when I hear, and you talk about safety and quality, again, those seem to be front and center, is an important part, maybe the central part of your value proposition as you talk to new customers and as you continue to get repeat business with customers you've been doing business with for decades. What's the and again, from a soft skills or quality standpoint, what quality do you believe are what promotes the? Again, I consider safety and a safety program as safety practices and the culture, along with quality, with the same kind of elements. I consider that all part of the process, the hard skills aspects of running a successful contracting business. What are the qualities that those reflect from you as a leader when you talk about those with such firmness and such directness and such energy? What qualities are you projecting are important to you in talking about those two aspects of running a successful contracting business?
That's a good question. I think what's important is that you see that now the focus is ESG, environment, social governance. Mm-hmm. So what is that? Well, that can mean many different things. Just like safety and quality. When I first saw safety start growing, it was like, well, you had to tick off the boxes to qualify for an RFQ. The same thing with quality is, what's your QMS? What's your quality management system? Well, you had to tick off the box. For me, it's got to be sincere. It's got to be for the right reasons. And it's got to be because you care about your people. And if you can instill that, then all of a sudden it becomes pretty easy. But if you're doing it just to tick off the box, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. I think the biggest thing, Dennis, is that up here we are, it's like, what is your Aboriginal engagement? And there's all different things, 51% ownership. But for us, because we care, because Doug and I care, we've put $170 million worth of paychecks in Aboriginal pockets in the last 10 years. That's making a difference. Yeah. We don't do it to tick off the box. We do it because we care. Yeah. And all of a sudden people start recognizing that, and we maintain in Saskatchewan 30% Aboriginal. That's more than the percentage of the population in that province. And we've got people doing this for a long time, and they know we care. And I think that makes a difference. So it's like, even when we're working on ESG, because there's large companies, what is your ESG? We want it to be our ESG, not what's politically correct or something that doesn't represent who we are. Yeah. So that today is the challenge we're working on right now. What does that mean? So we got Lauren and Brian's working on that, and obviously we'll sit down, we'll go through that stuff. So to go back to the original question, it comes down to doing it for the right reasons. Mm-hmm. And then it just becomes second nature. It's funny, with me, right down to my kids, everybody, when we travel Mexico or different places, or I've been on job sites, our eyes are so trained to say, oh my God, can you see how those guys are working? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you see, and even in your home life, I used to cut my grass in cut-off blue jeans and bare feet.
Nice. Good.
No sunglasses.
Good move. Yeah. No sunglasses.
So now it's like I'm wearing safety glasses, I'm wearing hard-toed boots, I'm wearing long pants. And same thing with someone's whippersnapping or doing something. It's changed our way of thinking. And I have to stress this, that what you do in preaching at work, you must do at home and not be a hypocrite.
Yeah.
And even with the COVID was a perfect challenge. What we did at work, we did at home, because you never know who's looking.
Right.
And you also
That's
have
right.
to make sure, is if you're saying something and people believe you're sincere, then you can't lose that.
Yeah. I had very high expectations for how this conversation was going to progress. To say that I was not the least bit disappointed is an understatement. You said the word care. And that was exactly the word I was looking for, which tells me just so much about how well grounded you are in your personal values and understanding, why the thing that Dennis talks about all the time is important. That is the qualities of people. As the leader in the seat that you sit in, everybody in your company is watching what you do and listening to what you say. And they're all very fortunate, and I'm being gracious because I feel it's appropriate. All of them are hearing and seeing a person who understands in their soul what leadership is all about. Your story is important. It will be educational and informative and inspiring to people. What you've done in your role and how you talk about your people and developing your company and the businesses that you're developing, I think is marvelous education for folks. And I hope a lot of people have an opportunity to hear this conversation. I thank you so much for taking the time that you took. I mean, I know you genuinely are a very, very busy guy. And so I'm grateful that you took this time to be a guest on my podcast.
Well, thanks. Obviously I'm still passionate about what I do, and I don't think you can fake when you care.
Dare I might describe it in the words of my mentor, Steve Farber, who says, do what you love in the service of people who love what you do.
Oh.
I think that describes Jeff Granberg.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Jeff. Take care.
Thanks for joining us today for this episode of the Soft as Steel podcast with your host, Dennis Duran. Dennis is the author of Soft as Steel and a leading speaker and trainer for organizations across many industries and verticals. To learn more about the work Dennis is doing to activate soft skills in the workplace, contact him at DennisDuranSpeaking.com. Be sure to check out his book, Soft as Steel, on Amazon or wherever books are sold. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or wherever you'd like to get your podcasts. And please remember to share this episode with your friends, colleagues, and anyone you feel would benefit from the conversation. We'll see you next time on the Soft as Steel podcast with Dennis Duran.